You're having a laugh, aren't you? That bike's not for sale. I'm not laughing. It's a prop, mate. Decoration. Adds character to the window. I'll pay whatever you want. The owner's eyebrows lifted, then pinched into a single skeptical line. He stood behind a glass case of pocket watches, their faces ticking out of rhythm like a dozen small hearts, and peered past David's shoulder at the thing in question. A battered, sky-blue bicycle with a bell the size of a plum and a leather saddle split like a smile. Spring light pooled across the shop floor, picking out dust in the air. The sign above the door read Harrington and Sons, Curios, Records, Repairs. No Sons in sight, only the one Harrington, linen shirt, navy waistcoat, hands smudged with oil, sizing up his customer like a chess move. Name your price, David said quietly. Two teenagers near the postcard rack paused mid-snicker, their phones already lifted at chest height as if on reflex. The shop was one of those narrow London places, shelves stacked like cliffs, every inch humming with memory, tin lunchboxes, enamel kettles, a crate of 7-inch singles labeled Northern Soul £2 each. But the bicycle, half hidden behind a stack of wooden crates and a 1960s pram, was the only thing in the room that had him by the throat. Harrington cleared his. It's a bit of rubbish, really? He gestured with a rag, feigning nonchalance that didn't reach his eyes. Paint's flaking, chains past it, wheels are likely buckled. Sentimental value to the shop, mind? People coming off the street because they see it in the window and think they've walked into 1978. Good for business. I'll pay for the sentiment too. Will you now? The owner's mouth tugged left. All right then. 15,000. The teenagers made a sound, sharp and delighted. One of them mouthed, "No way," toward his camera. A man in a barber jacket, leafing through vinyl, glanced up with a frown that ripened to intrigue. Somewhere deeper in the shop, a clock chimed noon, its bell too loud for the room. Cash or card? David asked. Harrington blinked. The world seemed to tilt and then right itself. Card will do. David produced a simple black card, worn at the edges, the way a thing becomes honest from use. If he had any impulse to argue the price or show his teeth against the sneer rolling toward him from the postcard rack, he didn't let it surface. His focus was the blue paint, the bell, the little T hand scratched near the seat tube. Barely there, a tremor of a letter, the line crossing the top so faint you could miss it unless you knew it was supposed to be there. The terminal chirped to life. Harrington slid it across, eyes darting between card and man and bike, as if trying to marry a face he half recognized with a purchase he didn't. He didn't clock the name. Plenty of shopkeepers in London don't. They see people, not headlines. But the teenagers did, and their whisper became a ripple, a low tide drawing more eyes. Is that? It is. No chance. Pin there, sir. David keyed in the code. The terminal thought for a breath and spat a receipt. Harrington tore it, handed it over, still waiting for someone to shout gotcha, and for the joke to end. It didn't. David folded the paper twice and put it in the inside pocket of his coat like a letter he meant to answer later. Do you have a cloth? He asked. A cloth? For the dust. Harrington found one, already dirty, the sort of rag that lives under counters. David took it and moved toward the bicycle as if approaching a sleeping animal. He laid a palm against the head tube, gentle, almost formal, and then wiped once, twice. Under the dust, the blue brightened by a shade, not the color of sky exactly, but the color of hopefulness someone painted onto metal decades ago, believing it would stand a lifetime. The door dinged behind a woman with a pram. She came halfway in and stalled at the scene. A man in a long coat and beanie, hands careful on rust and memory, an owner holding a card terminal like a talisman. Two boys with phones, their laughter curdled into fascination. Every shop breathes on a rhythm. For a moment, this one held its breath. Sir, Harrington said, softer now. You do realize, this thing's been in the window since before lockdown. I bought it in a job lot. It's nothing special. I know exactly what it is. And what's that then? David looked at him, eyes clear in the way that makes people stop performing. It's mine. The boys exchanged a glance, oh this is good, and angled their cameras for a better shot. Their screens caught the bell, the battered front fork, the old Sturmey Archer gear shifter mounted like a relic. They caught the edge of his mouth, that traveling half smile you could put on a billboard, and the T scratched into paint so thin it was almost not there. Harrington's voice dropped, an involuntary courtesy to the sacred. You've had one like it? No, David said. I had this one. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say my dad scratched that letter when I was 13. He didn't say we couldn't afford a new lock, and he said a mark would be a better deterrent than any chain because thieves don't like things that look owned. He didn't say I used to ride this to train before sunrise through air that smelled like rain, past the butchers on Church Lane where they hosed blood into gutters that steamed in winter. He didn't say the bell is wrong, I changed it once but the bracket's the same, and the way the handlebar tape phrase at the left is because I'm left-handed when I worry, and kept twisting it until my dad swore and then laughed and then gave me a clip for it that I lost by Thursday. He didn't say any of it. He only breathed and the dust lifted and the memory swam so close to the surface he had to anchor his jaw not to let all of it spill out and drown the room. One of the teenagers, the taller one with a Manchester scarf despite being nowhere near a ground, cleared his throat and played presenter to an audience of strangers. "Ladies and gents," he said to his phone, "David Beckham just paid 15 grand for a rusty bike." 15 grand? I mean, what? His laughter skipped along the ceiling like a stone over a canal. David ignored him. "Does the bell still work?" he asked. Harrington, blinking back into the polite business of business, flicked the bell. It stuttered, then rang, a little tinny, a little shy, but a ring nonetheless. The sound drifted down the aisle of second-hand hats and bounced off oak and brass. The woman with the pram smiled despite herself. Somewhere, as if the city heard the pitch and answered, a delivery bike clattered by outside. "Would you like a bag?" Harrington said, and immediately felt ridiculous. "No bag." A corner of humor creased David's mouth. "I'll take it as it is." He lifted the bicycle off its stand. It was heavier than modern ones, closer to a friend you carry than a machine you command. The front wheel wobbled and knocked against his shin. He steadied it, rolled it toward the door. The boys backed up, filming, the bell chiming once above the door as if to bookend the moment. On the pavement, April sun washed the high street in thin gold. A bus hissed to a stop and then sighed back into motion. David set the bike down and looked outward at the city where a kid can fall in love with the idea of a ball long before he ever sees a stadium, where a father can work 3 jobs and still find breath enough to say again when a son asks for one more shot, one more ride, one more story. He tipped his head to Harrington in thanks. Do you want a photo?" Harrington blurted, late to the party of recognition. The cards turned over in his head and finally lined up, and his mouth made a small O without sound. "I mean for, the receipt. Proof for tax. Or something." David shook his head, smiling. "No need." The boys were less shy. "David, mate, say something for the vid." "You didn't?" He put a hand to the worn leather saddle, and flinched, a memory like a splinter under a fingernail, then found the handlebars and walked. The front wheel squeaked on the first revolution, then found an obedient circle. The street was a river and he stepped into it. The boys' video went up 30 seconds later under a caption typed with glee, "15K for scrap metal skull loudly crying face." It found a current and slipped away, doing what such things do, hunting the dopamine that lives in ridicule, while David disappeared around the corner with the bicycle trailing its small shadow. In the car parked behind his house, the garage door rolled up with a clatter that always made him think of his childhood front gate. He wheeled the bike inside and shut the door against the world. The noise died. The quiet was cathedral-like, the kind that makes you whisper even when you're alone. The space smelled of oil and cedar and winter boots. Family life condensed into scent. Jerseys framed along one wall watched without judgment. On a shelf beneath them, a lined-up squad of balls from bygone matches sat like moons with scars. He leaned the bicycle against a workbench where a jar of screws looked like rain caught in glass. For a long beat he didn't touch it. He simply looked, at the war wounds along the top tube, the chips where U-locks had left their teeth, the nick on the left pedal where his dad once clipped a curb and said a word he wasn't supposed to say and then said, grinning, "Don't tell your mom." The tea. The stupid, homemade tea drunk on pride and love and cheap lager. A man had scratched his initial into blue enamel because sometimes that's the only contract you can afford. "This is ours." David pulled a stool closer, sat down, and took his wallet out again, not for money this time, but for the thin rectangle of paper still warm with the ink of a decision. He unfolded the receipt and placed it on the bench, smoothing the crease. 15,000. A number so round it belonged on a pitch. He read it like a litany and felt nothing at all about the money and everything about the price. He opened a drawer for an old t-shirt and made it into a cloth. Slow he wiped. He wasn't cleaning, he was remembering. Cables buzzed with a memory of tension. He ran a finger along the head tube, the way a person traces a name on a gravestone they haven't visited in too long. "You old stubborn thing," he said, and the garage made his voice bigger. "You found your way home." He could have called someone. A restorer, a friend with a van, a journalist who would spin the narrative into something palatable. He could have prepped a statement. Instead, he put on the kettle in the little corner kitchenette that had seen more post-match toasties than any five-star kitchen, and when it whistled he poured hot water into a chipped mug with number 7 on the side. Steam ghosted the air. He pressed the mug to his lips without drinking and sat back on the stool. The first tear surprised him. It wasn't cinematic. It didn't glitter down a cheek in slow motion. It spilled, hot and annoying, and he wiped it away with the heel of his palm as if apologizing to himself for being human. But it opened a door, and behind that door was a face he knew better than his own. Again, Ted said in his memory the way he always did. "Hat up, Brief. You're not just riding to training. You're riding to a life, son." He was 13, then 14. East London mornings had teeth. Fog sat low over pavements and swallowed sound. They would set off together, his dad on foot for the first street, then waving him on, go on, and he pedaled, the bell on the handlebar a talisman, the tires making a hush like secrets across wet tarmac. The bell never rang because it was necessary. It rang because it meant we're doing it, because sometimes joy needs noise. The bike would take him as far as the bus stop, then as far as the train station, then as far as the idea of Manchester, which at that age was not a place but a rumor. He'd lock it by looping the shank of a chain through the frame and the railings, and when he forgot the chain his dad would say, "Right then, we'll make it yours another way," and dig out a nail and etch that T with all the ceremony of a christening. "Not much of a lock," Ted said, stepping back to admire his vandalism with a grin that made everything in the world feel possible. "But thieves are like the rest of us. They don't want trouble." He could hear the laugh. He could hear the winter cough that came a year later when the factory got colder and the hours got longer. He could hear the silence in their kitchen the week they sold the bike. The pause between "this is what we've got, love and we'll manage," and then the sound of his own voice, young and too loud, "We'll buy it back." And the way his mum squeezed his fingers once under the table so he would not say more. "Dad," David said in the garage to air and oil and blue paint, "I told you I'd find it." There are stories, the sort that make people clap, where a son redeems what a father pawned to pay for a dream. And then there is the story you live in your kitchen when nobody is watching, and the thing you sell is not a symbol but a way to get through a month without the meter running out. The bike had disappeared into that gray of survival. He had looked for it in the way people look for a stranger's face in a crowd, not expecting and yet always. Today that look had ended. His phone buzzed on the bench. He let it. It buzzed again. On the third insistence he flipped it over. 4 missed calls from his agent. 3 messages from friends. "Did you really? Mate, what are you doing? Tell me this is a joke. And a link from an unknown number to a clip already chopped and captioned. Him at the till, the card, the boys emoji. The headline on one repost read, "When legends lose the plot." The comments as predictable as weather in April. He set the phone face down again, picked up a hex key. The seat clamp creaked. He lowered the saddle to the height he needed now rather than then. The leather complained and then settled into its purpose. He oiled the chain with the reverence of communion. Each link took shine and pivoted more willingly. The front tire would need a new tube. He found a pump, tried his luck, listened to air hiss in and then back out like a joke told to no one. He laughed, the honest, tired sort that lives next to relief. "Okay," he said. "We'll fix you. But first we remember." He pushed the bike to the door and lifted the garage. Evening had edged closer. The brick of the house opposite glowed a richer red. He rolled into the drive and then to the curb, swung a leg over like a kid who believes every movement might launch a story. He didn't try to ride. Not yet. He just sat, 1 foot on the ground, one on a pedal, and watched the street. Across the way, Mrs. Anand wrestled her bin back up the short path and waved with a familiarity that soothed him like tea. "New toy?" she called. "Old one," he said. "You'll fall off. Men of a certain age do." He grinned. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." She laughed and disappeared into her house. He stared at the horizon line of terraced roofs. A plane scratched a white idea across the sky. His hands tightened on rubber grips that had been gripped by his own younger hands, and by his father's when he'd pretend to steal the bike and ride it in circles, knees comically high, to make his son laugh before school. He climbed off and wheeled the bike back inside. He didn't answer the calls that night. He opened a photo album instead, the big one with a cracked spine that smelled of dust and rain. He set it on the kitchen table and paged until he found what he wanted. A snapshot of a boy in shorts, socks sagging, next to a man with dark hair and a mechanic's grin. Between them, blue paint and a bell. He pressed the photo flat. It was taken outside their semi in Leytonstone on a day the sky couldn't make up its mind. In the foreground, the letter T was too small to show, but he remembered the pride that radiated from it like heat. He slid the album aside and took another photo. This one with his phone, of the album photo next to the bicycle now leaned against his kitchen wall. He cropped it and posted, "No filters, no tags, no rallying cry. Some things never lose their value." He turned the phone to airplane mode. The city exhaled. In that quiet he could hear the small, stubborn sounds of a house loved. The boiler ticking as it relaxed. The pipes sighing like old men after a long story, someone upstairs shifting in their sleep. And underneath it, a hum he couldn't name, something like a chord drawn quietly on a guitar. Memory is an instrument. It plays you if you let it. He went to bed with the blue ghost of the bike on his eyelids. Morning brought headlines. He didn't read them, but he felt them in the way a dog feels weather. Every ping tried to erect a narrative around him, quick scaffolding slapped to a complex building. He shaved, showered, dressed for a day without a plan. In the garage again he stood with the bicycle and thought about what you do with a relic you've reclaimed. Lock it behind glass? Paraded for sympathy? The answer sprouted so naturally he almost laughed. He threw the bike into the back of the family SUV with a grunt and a blanket and drove. The postcode he typed into sat-nav felt like muscle memory. East London angled toward him as if it had been waiting, the streets narrowing to names he could mouth. Kinhall Road, Cathall, Harrow Road, the railway bridge with graffiti he half recognized. Shops that had changed names 3 times in his lifetime and smells that hadn't. Fried onions, morning bread, diesel, rain on warm pavement. He parked on a side street where he once had hopped a curb and taken a bollard as a personal challenge. He lifted the bike out, set it on the pavement, straightened his coat. He turned a corner into a lane that led to the small park behind the row of houses where he used to kick a ball against a wall for hours until a neighbor shouted for mercy. The wall had been repainted since. It was still a wall. He rolled to the school gates, his school, now with better windows and a security camera eyeing cynically. The caretaker, a man with a friendly belly and a city hat, looked up from sweeping and did a double take. "Blimey," the man said, then checked himself, then smiled. "You all right there?" "Yeah," David said. "Just visiting old haunts." "That your bike?" "It is now." The caretaker eyed it with a man's appreciation for a contraption that has survived. "Needs air. Among other things. You want the pump from the shed? That would be brilliant." In the shadow of the shed, he filled the front tire until it held shape. It leaked slow as a secret, but it would roll for a while. He thanked the caretaker with a promise of a signed shirt for his nephew that he would absolutely keep. He wheeled onto the path, bell chiming once as if in salute. A boy on a scooter slowed, looked, and then did the British thing and pretended not to be bothered. On the back field, the grass had a spring that felt new underfoot. He walked a circle with the bicycle at his side and let the place talk. Ghosts are noisy if you don't shush them. Here was where his dad had stood with a thermos in frost and said, "One more run, then we'll get hot chips." Here was where he'd fallen hard, breath punched out, eyes watering, and heard its only breath, "It comes back," and it did. Here was the tree that had shed sticky summer on his forearms and taught him the stupid joy of climbing. Here was the lane he'd sprinted down when the letter from United arrived and his legs forgot how to be legs for a moment. He swung a leg over the bicycle. The tire complained. The chain wanted a gear that didn't exist anymore. He pushed off anyway, let the momentum eat the worry. The bike moved, stubbornly and then with a kind of relief, like an old friend resuming an old argument. He rolled along the perimeter, the bell silent, the bell ringing he couldn't tell. Wind found his face and smoothed it. He didn't ride far. He didn't need to. He stopped under a sky that had decided to be blue. He put his feet down and laughed, a sound that pinged between the goalposts like a wayward shot. When he looked up, the caretaker had his phone held awkwardly, recording. David waved him away, and the man shrugged and pocketed it with a conspirator's nod. "Coffee?" the caretaker called. "Another time," David said. As he turned to leave, a boy of 9 or 10 trudged up, clinging to a school bag too big, with hair that couldn't decide what to do and eyes trying to be fearless. "Is that yours?" the boy asked, chin lifting toward the bike. "It is," David said. "It's rubbish." "It is," David agreed. The boy squinted. "Why'd you have it then?" David thought of how to answer a question whose answer is a kilo of story. He chose the smallest scoop. "Because once it got me where I needed to go." The boy considered this, then looked at the bell. "Does it ring?" "Sometimes." "Can I?" "Go on then." The boy reached a tentative finger and flicked. The bell gave that shy, stubborn pling. The boy's face did the thing faces do when a very small magic confirms itself true. He nodded as if to say fair enough, and walked off backward for a step or two before remembering to be cool about it. David wheeled the bicycle back to the car, air seeping from the tube in a long, quiet exhale. By the time he reached the boot, the tire was soft again. He lifted the frame in and stood a moment with the hatch open, breathing old air and new. He drove not to his house but to a lockup he rented for too many reasons. He keyed into a unit 2 doors down from a boxing gym and switched on the light. Dust rose like applause. There was a workbench here too, less sentimental, more useful. He set the bicycle on a stand, the kind you clamp on the seat post, and spun the rear wheel. It wobbled, then found rhythm. He ordered parts on his phone. New tubes, brake pads, cables, a set of bearings. Then, on impulse, typed the name of a man he hadn't called in years. Graham, the mechanic at the old shop his father used to favor. He still had the number. It rang 5 times and then a voice like grit on good bread said, "Yeah? Graham. It's David." "You don't say," Graham said, not missing a beat. "I'm watching you buy a crap bike on me niece's phone." David laughed. "Course you are. Your old man would have called you a pillock and then told you to ride it home. What you want, lad?" "I want it safe. And I want it real. Not showroom. Bring it tomorrow. I'll give it a look. For Ted's boy, I'll even charge extra." They both laughed, and the laugh was a relief, a hand on a shoulder across years. When he hung up, he sat on a stool and let the quiet speak again. The day had put him somewhere near the edge of a thought he hadn't had language for. The headlines were doing their necessary unkindness out there, but here the work ahead was simple. Clean, mend, keep what's honest. He checked messages once, ignored the panting ones, answered the handful that asked if he was all right with a thumbs-up emoji that meant better than that, and then put the phone face down again. He stayed late. He polished where metal deserved it and stopped where scars told a story that didn't need editing. He wrapped the bars in fresh tape the color of old photographs. He replaced the bell with one that sounded almost right but saved the bracket and the little dent where a younger version of him had leaned too hard. He left the tea alone. Of course he did. Some signatures you don't embroider. When he finally locked up and stepped into night, London was doing that thing it does, glowing from inside itself. He put his hands in his pockets and tilted his head to a sky that would never again look like it did when he was 14, and the future was a cliff edge you couldn't see beyond. The present was not a cliff. It was a lane and he was still on it and the bell still rang. On the drive home his phone, trader and tool, buzzed in the cup holder. He answered one call because it bore the only name that could have made him. "Mum," he said. "Are you eating?" she asked, as if the internet's noise could starve a son. "I am." "Good. Your brother says they're being daft about a bike." "They are. What have you done?" "I brought a thing home." She was quiet a beat. He could hear her kettle. "Your dad would have said you overpaid," she said finally, and David laughed, a sweet ache in it. "And then he would have told everyone in the pub." "I know. You all right?" "I am." "You going to tell them why?" "Not yet." "Good." A pause stretched long enough to stitch. "Bring it round tomorrow. I'll make tea. We'll sit in the garden and pretend he's late." "Okay," he said, and the word was a blessing. They hung up. He drove the last mile with the window cracked to spring. In the rearview mirror, the bicycle's silhouette was a dark idea. In the morning he'd take it to Graham. In a week he'd ride it further. In a month he didn't know. The story could go on without his permission. Let it. For tonight, it was enough that the blue was under his roof. He parked, shut the garage behind him, and stood for a full minute with his palm on the cool top tube. "Home," he said, not to the bike, not to the house, but to the part of himself that had been cycling back along every street all these years, looking for a door left open. It was. In another corner of the city, 2 boys refreshed their notifications and watched the numbers go up, laughing and a little afraid of the attention they'd conjured. In another, a man in a waistcoat replayed his own CCTV and tried to decide whether the day had been a miracle or a prank. In yet another, a caretaker poured himself a late tea and told his wife he'd lent his pump to a legend. London shrugged, and then, because it loves a story more than it loves the telling of a story, it turned the page. The bicycle leaned into the darkness beside him like a friend settling. He reached up and pulled the chain on the single bulb. The light went out. In the dense, kind black that followed, the bell gave a single, tiny, inexplicable ring. The next morning, London was draped in its familiar gray mist, the kind that seemed to muffle the world. David woke up early not because of any alarm, but because sleep hadn't truly taken him. Downstairs, the old blue bicycle stood in the corner of his living room, still leaning gently against the wall. It looked small compared to the glass walls and modern furniture, but somehow, it held the most presence in the room. He poured himself a cup of black tea, no sugar, and sat at the table, staring at it. Every scratch, every flake of chipped paint, every bit of rust carried a whisper of something lost and found again. The night before, he had promised his mother he would bring it home. to the house where everything had begun, where his father's laughter still seemed to echo in the floorboards. David carefully lifted the bike and laid a thin blanket over it before placing it in the back of his car. He wasn't just driving through the city that morning, he was traveling back in time. The streets of East London had changed, but not completely. The same bakery was still there, the one his father used to stop at for warm rolls after fixing cars. The old pub on the corner still had the faded sign swinging in the wind. When he finally pulled up to number 14, his mother was already standing by the front door, arms crossed, a soft smile forming beneath her disbelief. "You actually brought it," she said, half laughing, half shaking her head. "You've been all over the news, you know. Who buys back an old bike for that kind of money?" David smiled faintly. "It wasn't about the money, Mum. I just bought back a piece of home." She sighed, her eyes warming as she came closer. When he rolled the bike through the gate, the wheels squeaked softly, almost as if greeting the house. Margaret reached out and brushed her hand along the handlebar. Her voice trembled. "If your father could see this, he'd cry." "I think he's already seen it," David said quietly. They brought the bike into the narrow hallway. The smell was the same as always, wood polish, old photos, and time. The walls were lined with memories. A younger David in a football kit, a family Christmas photo, a black and white shot of his father standing proudly in his workshop. Margaret disappeared for a moment and came back with a dented silver tin box. "He kept all his little things in here," she said, handing it over. "Maybe it's time you had it." David turned it in his hands. The metal was cool, scratched, and familiar. "You think I should open it?" "Go on," she smiled. "The attic's still the same. You'll know what to do." He climbed the creaky wooden ladder to the attic, a place frozen in another era. Dust danced in the weak light from the small window. He sat on the floor, placed the tin box beside an old wooden chest labeled Ted's Tools, and opened it carefully. Inside were scraps of paper, yellowed photos, and a small rusted key. Beneath them was a folded letter. The handwriting made his chest tighten. It was his father's. "Davy, if you're reading this, it means you've found something worth keeping." David froze. The voice seemed to come alive in his head, deep and kind. "You've always been stubborn, that's good. The world will try to change you, but don't let it. What you ride, what you wear, what you own, none of that defines you. What matters is who you carry in your heart. This old bike doesn't mean much to others, but to me it's proof that we tried. Proof of what we built together." His eyes blurred. He pressed his fingers against the words as if they could still feel his father's hand. "If one day it's gone, don't be sad. What's meant for you will find its way back. And when it does, ride it. Ride until you remember what happiness feels like." Signed, "Love, Dad." David folded the letter, holding it close. In the corner of the box, there was an old photo. His father standing in front of a small bike repair shop, smiling beside the same blue bicycle. The sign above the door read Harrington and Sons. It hit him at once. That was the exact name of the shop where he had just bought the bike. A coincidence too perfect to be chance. He exhaled a shaky laugh, half in disbelief, half in awe. That afternoon he returned to the shop. Harrington, the elderly owner, was polishing the glass counter when David walked in. He looked up, clearly surprised. "Back again? Don't tell me you want a refund," he joked. David placed the photograph on the counter. "Do you recognize this man?" Harrington leaned closer, squinting. His face changed slowly from confusion to recognition. "Bloody hell, that's Ted Beckham. He used to fix bikes for my father when I was a kid. Never charged a penny he didn't have to. Always had time for everyone." David nodded. "He was my father." The old man's eyes widened. "No wonder that bike felt different. It came in from an estate sale. I almost kept it myself. Guess it was meant to find its way back to you." David smiled softly. "Keep the money I paid you. Use it to fix up some bikes for the neighborhood kids. The ones who can't afford their own." Harrington blinked, touched. "You mean that?" "My dad would have wanted it that way," David said simply. He turned toward the door, hand on the handlebars. Outside, the late afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the street in gold. He stood there a moment, the breeze tugging at his jacket. The letter was folded neatly in his pocket, its words still echoing. He climbed onto the bike, his movements deliberate, almost reverent. The seat creaked a little, the bell gave a gentle ring, and he started to pedal. Slowly at first, then faster, the wheels humming over the pavement. He passed the old park where he'd played football as a boy, the slope that had once felt like a mountain. People recognized him, waved, smiled, but he didn't stop. He wasn't David Beckham, the celebrity, the icon. Not here. Not now. He was just a son, retracing a path that had waited patiently for him to return. At the end of the street, he stopped beneath the same lamppost where his father had once stood cheering for him. He pulled the letter from his pocket, reading the final line again, "Ride until you remember what happiness feels like." He smiled, eyes glistening. And so he did, riding through the fading light of London, the bell ringing softly, the sound carrying down the street like a heartbeat that refused to fade. That evening, the rain finally came, thin, quiet, and constant. London always had a way of washing its streets clean without really changing their color. David sat by the window of his mother's house, the bicycle now resting against the garden wall, droplets gathering on its frame. Every few seconds, the wind would shake the branches above it, sending tiny splashes across the old blue paint. His mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself while making tea. "You've been staring out there for an hour," she said gently from behind him. "It's just a bike, love?" He smiled faintly. "It's not just a bike, Mum. It's a memory I thought I'd lost for good." Margaret handed him a cup and sat down beside him. "Your father loved that thing more than his toolbox. You remember how he used to take you to the fields every Sunday morning? He'd always say, 'A man who keeps his wheels clean keeps his life in motion.'" David chuckled softly. "He said that every week, even when it rained." They both laughed, a shared sound of comfort and grief. After a moment, she looked at him with a kind of quiet pride. "He'd be proud of you, you know. Not for the fame, not for the stadiums. For this. For remembering." He didn't answer right away. He just looked back outside, watching the rain slide down the window, blurring the view of the bicycle until it looked almost new again. The next morning, he woke up early, long before the sun came out. The city was still half asleep when he carried the bicycle out of the gate. The air was cold and sharp, the streets glistening under the streetlights. He adjusted the chain, tightened the brakes, and climbed on. He didn't plan a route, his legs simply knew where to go. He pedaled past the bakery, down the narrow lanes of Leytonstone, through the open park where he used to practice free kicks as a boy. The sound of the tires slicing through shallow puddles mixed with the rhythmic clicking of the gears, steady, calming, familiar. As he crossed the bridge over the canal, he saw a young boy standing on the side holding a broken bike. The chain was off, the front tire flat. The kid looked about 10, wearing a school uniform too big for him, with mud splashed up to his knees. "Need a hand?" David asked, stopping beside him. The boy hesitated, eyes wide. You're David Beckham." David grinned. "I used to be. Today I'm just a guy who knows how to fix a bike." The boy laughed nervously. "It won't move. The chain fell off and my mum's gonna be mad if I'm late again." David knelt down, his fingers remembering movements they hadn't done in years. Within minutes, the chain was back on, and the wheel turned smoothly again. "There you go," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Try it." The boy climbed on and rode a small circle. "It works. Thank you." He stopped, still catching his breath. "Why are you riding such an old bike? You could have, like, anything." David looked down at the faded blue frame, smiled, and said, "Because this one knows where I come from." The boy tilted his head, not quite understanding but nodding anyway. "You're cool, Mr. Beckham." "Not as cool as you when you make it to school on time," David said, giving him a playful push. As the boy pedaled off, waving over his shoulder, David stayed on the bridge for a while, watching the morning sun rise over the rooftops. The city was waking up, the smell of bread from the bakery, the sound of buses, the chatter of lives beginning another day. He felt small in the best possible way. By noon, he found himself back near the football pitch where he used to train as a kid. The field was empty except for a few boys kicking a tattered ball. They stopped when they saw him. "Are you really him?" one of them asked cautiously. David laughed. "Depends who you mean." "The football guy. The famous one." He shrugged. "Maybe. But I used to be a kid like you. And this," he tapped the handlebars, "was how I got to every game." The boys gathered around the bicycle, touching it like it was a relic. One of them whispered, "It's so old." David smiled. "Yeah, but it still goes anywhere I need it to." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wrench, the same one his father had once used, and handed it to the tallest boy. "Here, keep it. Every team needs someone who can fix what's broken." The boy's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," David said. "But only if you promise to help the others when their bikes break too." They nodded in unison. David mounted his bicycle again, gave the bell a soft ring, and started down the path. Behind him, the kids shouted his name, laughing and cheering, not for the celebrity but for the man on the bike. That evening, he returned home to find his mother waiting by the gate. I saw you on the news again, she said, pretending to scold him. They filmed you with those children. He sighed, smiling. I didn't mean to make it public. Well, it's a good thing, love. The reporter said you inspired a local charity to start a bike repair program for kids. David looked genuinely surprised. Really? She nodded. Apparently they're calling it Ride Back Home. I think your father would have liked that. For a long moment he said nothing. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and a rare sense of peace settled in his chest. Maybe, he said softly, it's not just about finding what we lost. Maybe it's about giving others the chance to find theirs too. He walked over to the garden and gently wiped the rain off the bike seat. The night was calm now. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the faint jingling of the bike bell, like an echo from another life. He looked up at the sky, whispered a quiet "Thanks, Dad," and smiled. Then, with that same quiet grace he carried on the field, he turned toward the street, ready to ride again, not toward fame or memory but toward something simpler. Something that felt a lot like home. A week later, the morning light over London was clear for the first time in days. The rain had washed the city clean, and the air smelled of damp stone and fresh beginnings. David stood outside the community center in East London, hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching a group of kids wobble down the street on their repaired bicycles. Some of them were old, mismatched, patched with duct tape, but every single one worked. And every single one carried a smile. He hadn't planned to start anything. Ride Back Home had taken a life of its own after that video went viral. A simple clip of him fixing a boy's chain had become a movement. The local repair shop had turned into a weekend hub where volunteers came to restore bikes for children in the neighborhood. The city council had even offered support. It was strange, he thought, how the smallest act could ripple outward, changing everything. Margaret walked out of the center with 2 mugs of tea and handed him one. They asked if you'd like to say a few words today, she said. David laughed softly. I've said enough words in my life, Mum. I think I'll just watch. Suit yourself, she smiled, looking at the kids. Your father would have loved this, you know. Helping others without expecting anything back. That was always his way. He nodded. It took me a while to understand that. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, watching as a boy helped his younger sister onto a small red bike. Her feet barely reached the pedals, but she beamed like she was flying. The bell chimed and David smiled. That sound, simple, bright, innocent, had become the heartbeat of something beautiful. Later that day, as the crowd thinned, one of the volunteers came running over, a man in his 30s wearing a worn leather jacket. Mr. Beckham, someone left this for you. He handed over a small brown envelope with no name on it. Inside was a folded note and a photograph. The picture was of a familiar street, the one where his father's old workshop once stood, but it looked different now. In its place was a small storefront painted light blue. The sign above read, Ted's Wheels, Community Bike Shop. David unfolded the note. Dear David, if you're reading this, you've already done more than you realize. Your father helped my family when I was a boy. He fixed my bike when I couldn't afford it, told me to pay it forward one day. I never got the chance to thank him, but today I think I finally did. Consider this shop a tribute to him, to you, and to every kid who still believes in small miracles. G. Harrington. David's eyes lingered on the signature. Harrington, the old shopkeeper. The same man who sold him the bike. He looked up, scanning the horizon as though searching for something unseen. That evening he rode there himself. The shop was small but lively. Children were inside, learning how to oil chains, patch tires, and balance wheels. On the back wall, under the shop's name, hung a framed photo of Ted Beckham, his father, smiling beside the same blue bicycle that had started it all. David stood there for a long moment, the hum of laughter around him blending with the rhythmic spin of bike wheels. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Graham Harrington appeared from the back room, wiping his hands on a rag. Didn't expect you so soon, he said with a grin. I had to see it, David replied. It's perfect. Harrington nodded toward the photo. Your dad deserved to be remembered this way. And you, well, you reminded us what that means. David smiled, that quiet kind of smile that comes from deep inside. I just found my way home, that's all. Before he left, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small wrench his father had once given him. It was old, rusted, and worn from his hand. He placed it on the counter. Keep this here, he said. Let the next kid who walks in know where this started. Harrington looked down, nodding slowly. I will. Outside, the sky had turned golden, the streets glowing under the late sun. David climbed onto his father's bike again, the same one that had brought him here, now cleaner but still worn at the edges. He began to pedal, the wind cool against his face, the sound of the bell echoing through the narrow lanes. As he rode through the neighborhood, children waved and shouted his name. He waved back, laughing, his heart light. He wasn't riding to escape or to chase anything anymore. He was just riding home. He turned down a quiet street lined with old brick houses, the same street he'd grown up on. At the end of it, the evening light caught the reflection of his mother standing by the window. She raised her hand to wave, her smile proud and soft. He slowed to a stop in front of the house, leaning on the handlebars. The letter from his father still rested in his pocket, edges worn, words memorized. He whispered the line one last time, "Ride until you remember what happiness feels like." He looked around, the laughter of children, the smell of fresh bread, the hum of life returning to a place once forgotten. And then he smiled, genuine, peaceful, and full of something eternal. David Beckham, the man who had once ridden the world, had finally found his way back. Not to fame, not to glory, but to the simple joy of motion, memory, and meaning. He rang the bell one last time, and its clear, gentle sound carried down the street like a message, one his father would have understood completely. Sometimes coming home isn't about where you live. It's about remembering who taught you how to move forward.